Welcome to Recovery His Way. I'm your host, Tom Reynolds, and today I'm sitting down with Jim Norville. Jim and I have been friends for a long time, number of years, and Jim's been a very faithful volunteer in our program and made a huge difference in our ministry here, and I'm really thankful for his work here. And he's a part of this series that we're starting on, All Rise, which is really highlighting how being a part of serving in the recovery community can really change us all and help us all grow and rise together. So, Jim, I'm glad you're here with us today.
Thanks.
I guess for our audience's sake, and even for mine a little bit, I'd kind of like to hear your story a little bit, just kind of where you got started, how you ended up in Huntsville, just that whole story.
Okay. Well, I was born in Southern Illinois in 1948. I'm 74 years old.
Okay.
I never lived where I was born, but that was kind of home. My father was in the Air Force for 20 years, and they were very poor at that time, and he couldn't even afford for my mom to stay with him at that time. He was in New Mexico, and I was born. I finally figured it out. I was born 6 months after my parents got married, so if you can do the math there. But they were married until my dad passed away for 55 years. So, but my grandparents were, three of my four grandparents, I never knew them to be in a church in their life. And so my dad came out of that background. His father was an alcoholic. My father was in World War II, and he, after he was gone for a year, he came back and his dad asked him where he'd been. So,
Wow.
So he didn't have much of a home life in that way. But interestingly, that my grandmother, my father's mother, was the only one who ever did go to church. I taught and baptized her, and she became a Christian. So, so I was happy for that. We moved around. We were in New Mexico and Texas, Abilene, Texas, and then my dad went overseas. We were in Illinois for a little while, for about a year, and then we moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, and finally Anchorage, Alaska. And I graduated from high school in Anchorage, Alaska. And I went to 4 different schools in second grade. I went to a different high school every year of high school. So
you've been deeply traumatized.
No, I was the oldest of 5 children.
Okay.
And I always did well in school, and that really helps in those situations. I think my brothers and sisters had a harder time because they didn't do quite as well in school. But I'm the only one in my family that ever graduated from college, university, with a 4-year degree. Now, one of my sisters had a 2-year degree. But I have one brother and 3 sisters. All my sisters live in Southern Illinois now. And my brother lives in Thailand.
Oh, okay.
But we didn't go to church until I was almost 10. I didn't know anything about God. And a man on the bus invited my dad to go to church, and he said, okay. And so he took us all to church, and then my parents started studying the Bible with him, and they became Christians. And on my 10th birthday, I got a Bible, which I'd never had before. And so I started reading it. And I found it really interesting, and so shortly thereafter, I was at a gospel meeting, and the preacher preached a lesson, and I figured out I was lost, and so I didn't ask my parents. I just got up and went and obeyed the gospel, and so I started going to men's business meetings when I was 12. Because I was a male member, we didn't have, and so I didn't say anything, but. And so we got involved in the church, and I was always going to be a math teacher until halfway through my senior year in high school, when I felt like God wanted me to preach, and I did my first attempt at evangelism when I was in high school. I tried to teach this young lady from high school using the Jewel Miller film strips and all, but. I decided since I was going to preach, I probably ought to go to a Christian school. So I went to Freed Hardeman University and then later to Harding University. got a degree in Bible and started preaching full time when I was 21
Okay.
in 1970. I never preached any place longer than 4.5 years. I preached in Missouri, Illinois, a number of places in Illinois, in Albany, Georgia, and Atlanta, Georgia, and back to Illinois. And then in I got married and met my wife we were both counselors at a Christian youth camp in Western Kentucky. And she was going to Freed-Hardeman the next year, and so I kind of latched on to her, and a year later we were married, and we've been married 54 years now.
Great.
And
Congratulations.
so she's been a real blessing for me and helped me, and been gone to all the places I've gone. Was, again, until 4.5 years was the longest that I spent at any place, until I in 1993 I saw a video about Russia, and I'd been a preacher for close to 30 years, and I'd never been out of the United States. And I always thought mission work was good, but I saw this and it really moved me. And so a friend of mine and I went over to Russia for 3 weeks, and the people were just begging to be taught. And I had 8 college students come up to me at the university and say, "Would you preach to us?" And so I agreed, and I went, and they met with me on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning when they didn't have class, which I didn't have that experience in the States.
Right.
And so I was really touched, and we taught and baptized 22 people in 21 days there, and there were people just begging to be taught. And so when I went back home, I decided I told my wife I wanted to move to Russia, and she thought I was crazy. Of course, she hadn't been. And so I was able to raise 2 years support in a month just from friends. And so we moved to Russia. And it was my wife's first time on an airplane.
Wow.
But
Okay.
she said, well, if that's what God wants, you do it. So she did. And but I was very unprepared at that time. And we have 2 children, a daughter who by that time was in college at Harding, and a son that we had adopted at 4.5 months old. And our son was 15 at the time, and he went with us, but we told him he could come back if he wanted to, and he did. But then he had some issues and ended up in the hospital, and so we left there and came back, and which was kind of a blessing in a way, because I saw that we were not prepared for that. So we came back, we went, took care of our son, and we went to studied Russian at the universities, and then we went over to Russia. We moved over to Russia. We got a team together. Our son was gone out of the house, and we went to Russia, and we went to Siberia. I'd never been there before, but we had a church that said they'd been praying for people like us for 2.5 years out of Denver, and so we went to Russia there, and we were there 10 years, which was over twice as long as I'd ever been in any place in my life.
Right.
So it was a great experience, and now I train the leaders there now, and it's the largest Church of Christ in Russia right now. So and they're just doing great, and I still talk with them, and until COVID, I went back to Russia every year to see them, so I'm involved in that. But that kind of led me to, in the church that was supporting us ran out of money or whatever. They had some problems, and so they told us they weren't going to be able to support us anymore, so I needed to look for somebody else to support us while we were there. And so in 2005, I talked to Clyde Jones, who was here in Huntsville, and about support, and he said, sure. And so the church in Huntsville, Central Church in Christ in Huntsville, started supporting us. And so we went back, and we were there until the end of 2007, at which time our daughter has lupus, and she had a couple of grandchildren and wasn't really able to take care of them. So she asked us if we would return here, and so we said sure. And so we came back to the States and we came back to Huntsville because that's who was supporting us, and I wanted to report. But I didn't know where we were going to go from there or what to do. And so the brethren there said, well, why don't you just stay here, work here? And I said, well, okay, if that's what you want. And so they didn't know for sure. So they took up special collection for the first 2 years I was here, and they got enough to support us each year. And so finally after that they said, well, I guess the people want you to stay. So they just put me in the budget, and so I became part of the staff at Central.
Okay, all right. And then, of course, his way, since we started in 2007, we've been associated with Central during that time, and so our guys would come there and that type of thing. What then prompted you? I mean, it sounds like to me, you accomplished some amazing things, particularly in Russia and in the mission work there. I can imagine coming back from that there would be a lot of feelings of success. You've kind of made your mark. You've kind of done this calling of God and done this, and now you kind of can retire and sit back and kind of be grateful for that great experience. And yet you come here and get involved in his women's student. Kind of what prompted that involvement?
Okay. Well, when I came, it was a very difficult time for me because I was in transition, and I never have viewed that about climbing or getting success or anything. I was just doing what I felt like God wanted me to do. And but I came back, and I'd always been the preacher or the lead missionary or whatever. And so when I came back, I was kind of lost as to find out what could I do, where can I serve.
How old were you then?
I was 59 when I returned.
Okay.
And I tried several things that people suggested, and they didn't work. And so I was just really struggling. I did initially, when I got back, I went to Clyde's. Clyde Jones had a life group that I went to, and very shortly he kind of turned over the teaching of that to me. Mm-hmm. And of course Clyde started this work then, and so I was interested in that. And so when I was in Russia, I met the guy who wrote the material for, it's called New Life Behavior. Mm-hmm. And he trained me to use it, and it's still being used there. And so I thought that would be good for the program here, and so I suggested that, and they liked that idea, and so I began to teach that course here, which it still goes, and the guys here have a lesson every week for the whole 9 months. Mm-hmm. And all, but I was just teaching it for the first, at that time it was a 6-month program, and I only taught for the first 30 days. I saw them, and then they weren't in my class anymore, even though they still had the lessons and I graded them. But I didn't like that as much because I enjoyed it, but I didn't get to see the guys after 30 days. I didn't have much, I didn't feel like I was contributing a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And so I scrambled around, and I really felt an urge to go preach someplace because that's what I'd always done. But my wife wanted to stay here, and we of course needed to stay and help our daughter. And so I was just trying to find ways, and then God just kind of opened the door. A man who was doing the MRT here program, and also doing IRPs, which are individual recovery plans that we do with guys when they first come in, left, and so I volunteered to take those over. I'm very blessed. The church, Central, the elders basically let me do whatever I want to do, which is pretty nice. And so I just look for opportunities to serve, and I felt like this ministry out here was the best ministry that I know of anywhere. And I mean, even more so than when I was on the mission field. And
why do you say that? What decides for you what's the best?
Well, what I like to do most is to teach the gospel to people. And here, there, usually you have to find people who are interested and all that. But here, guys are coming to change their life. Mm-hmm. And they're really, many of them are very hungry they know they don't want what they've had, and they're looking for something better. And what I've seen, and because I came here first at the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, and I've been working here ever since, with the guys here ever since. So this is my 15th year.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But what I've seen is guys who come and who figure out, my way doesn't work, and I can't seem to change me. And if they turn their life over to God, they do well. And guys who keep trying to do it their own way don't do well. Mm-hmm. And I tell that to all the guys when they come in. But I wanted the opportunity to share the gospel with them, if possible, and I got those opportunities as I spent more time with and got to know the guys, and they got to know me. That helped me get more involved and have more opportunities. And the greatest thing that I see about this ministry is I have guys coming. I don't have to ask them for a Bible study or anything. They come to me and ask me. That's the way I do it. I just, if they want, they come and ask me. And I get to share the gospel with a lot of guys. And now I teach 5 classes a week here.
Wow. Okay.
And besides that, I get usually on average probably about 10 Bible studies or counseling sessions a week individually with guys and all. And since I make my own schedule, it's a real blessing. I'm actually where I could retire, but if I retire, you can retire from a job, but you don't retire from the Lord. In the first place. In the second place, I'm doing what I love to do, and I have the opportunity. We have a class where I get to share the gospel. In fact, I just finished teaching it today. And so every man who comes through here I get to teach the gospel. And so I can think of no ministry, and I know that God's word is what can change lives. And so if I have the opportunity to share that with them, I know God's word will work on their heart, and so I can change. And I know of no ministry where, and I would think that would be every minister's dream would be to have people coming and saying, "Hey, would you study the Bible with me?"
Right.
And all, and that's what I have here. And so I absolutely love it, and just feel really blessed to do it, and can't see any situation other than if I had a health problem that would keep me from coming.
That's great, and you've certainly been faithful to that, and I know passionate about it. And I think it's an interesting story I've observed, having been in the church of the time I have been. That missionaries do a great work. It kind of is a crisis a lot of times when missionaries come back from the mission field because there's kind of a culture shock, reverse culture shock we talk about, and there's also just kind of a purpose shock in the sense that I've kind of pursued my great dream in life, and now I'm coming to some close of that, and kind of what do I do now? And at 59, I could think that it'd be a good time to kind of just fade into the background at that point, and yet you've chosen not to. And I'm interested in kind of why you chose not to. And also, how has this, you said this is important to you. In fact, in some ways you describe it as even more significant in some ways than your time in Russia. How has it impacted you? I mean, I see you impacting the guys around you, but how has it impacted you to be a part of this experience?
Well, I've gotten or received a whole lot of blessings from it personally. Number one, my son has struggled with addiction for many years. Was in prison a number of times. Was in the came to the program here, and so I was. Because I had never been involved with drugs, I really didn't know that much about relating to the guys with that, and yet I was wanting to help my son, but I didn't really know how to do that either. And so I guess that probably created even a more special interest in it. But because I've been working with the guys, I've come to understand. I think God's been teaching me how to be compassionate. To see the value of every human because God created them in His image, no matter what their situation in life is. I kind of use the illustration. It's like I take a dollar bill and I crumple it up and I throw it on the floor and I stomp on it and I pick it up and then I ask the guys, how much is it worth now? And they say $1, and it's still $1. And I said, yeah, it has intrinsic value regardless of what's happened to it. And so I try to explain that they have value, that God is, because they're created in God's image with an eternal spirit, that they're more valuable than the whole world. And so regardless of what's happened in their life, they're still valuable to God, and therefore valuable to me. And so I think that it's helped me to understand them and to be compassionate and to and see when people are. The biggest thing that you want to see, I think, in ministry or anything is lives changed. Okay, and only God can do that. Okay, but He uses us to be involved with people, to try to help people, and so every night I pray about my classes the next day and the guys I'm meeting with and all that, and I pray that I'll honor God in everything I say and do when I do that. And so, to me, that's I have those opportunities, and I ask God, I pray for opportunities to do that, and so and He keeps giving me those opportunities. Now I'm even I've had a chance to study and baptize not only some of the guys here, but their wives and their children. And I've got some ongoing studies now with some fiancés of some of the guys here. And so it's just kind of, I just kind of go wherever God kind of opens the door. And I have lots of energy, and I can't imagine going retiring and sitting around watching TV or something. That would bore me out of my mind. But it seems to me He's just blessing me. And also, when you get older, you should have some experience by this time. And so what I love about it also is I get to use all those things I've learned for all these years to try to help the guys. And it's also helped me, I think, being here, learn how to really love people. And just I don't get offended about stuff that people, I see people getting very sensitive about this and that. And I really, hey, we just need to get what's important here, which is, helping people and all. And so it's just helped me to be, I just see everybody. And I think that's what agape love is. And I try to teach the guys, I come out here and I choose to care about you guys. It's my choice. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay, right. I get to do that. That's my choice. But guess what? You have the same choice, and we can choose to care about anybody we want to. And I think that's what God, He chooses to care about us, and it's unconditional love, that agape love. And so, regardless of what we've done, He still cares about us. And so I get to do that with the guys here. So those are things that I think God has helped me to learn from and grow in, because it's pretty easy to judge people if you don't know them. Everybody's really, really hard on crime. Let's really get tough on crime unless you know the criminal. Oh, well, that's my son or that's my grandson or that. Well, we need to whatever. And so if you know them, then it's a little different. And so people talk about, oh, they're on drugs, they're this or that, but when you get to know them, well, hey, they're people just like you, your son, your grandson, or whatever. They're somebody's son and somebody, whatever. And so you learn to do that.
Amen. Well, I appreciate your story because, not only have you obviously had a huge impact on a lot of the guys here and their families, you meet them right when they pretty much get off the bus kind of thing in terms of coming in, and you're able to journey with them all the way through the process, and you've had a huge impact on them, but they've also had a huge impact on you.
Absolutely.
And you've been able to learn how to build a good relationship with your son.
Right. Yeah. I want to say he's now, and God just totally took care of that. So for the last year, he's just doing terrific. He sits beside me in church on Sundays, and he and his whole family, they drive an hour just to be here, to be at Central. And but he's just doing fantastic, and that gives me great joy. And but I also see that and I see the changes in other guys there that I've become close to, and you want that for every family, because these guys are somebody's son, of somebody, and so that's been a real
Good.
joy.
And I think one of the great things, at this time in your life that blesses us is that in a lot of cases when we're dealing with guys later on in life in their ministry and stuff like that, it's easy to kind of get sidelined or marginalized. And yet you have a tremendous amount of experience, a tremendous amount of wisdom, and being able to apply it and benefit these young men who most of them have lacked good male influence. To be a grandfather or father to them and have that kind of influence is tremendous for them, and certainly a blessing to be able to have your experience and your wisdom and your just life experiences that can help benefit them, and I know has. And it helps us, like you were saying, we become more compassionate. We're learning to relate to a generation of people that we may not identify with typically, and yet we're not sitting back in our easy chairs watching the news and saying that the world's going to hell in a handbasket kind of thing because of the younger generation. We're there meeting them, and they're helping us grow and become more compassionate with them. So I really appreciate all that you've done. I think it's a great story about, as people listen and watch this today, a lot of people are like, how can I get involved? And I think, you kind of got involved in little ways, and it's just, you just stayed faithful to that and let God evolve it into what it's going to be. And I just encourage anybody that's listening today that there's a way, whether you're 59 or 74 or 20 or whatever, that God's gifted you and given you an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. And I hope that we all take advantage of this opportunity. So thank you, Jim, for sharing with us, and thank you for listening and watching today. If you'd like to learn more about His Way, you can check out our website at hiswayinc.org.